All right, class, we're going to do what chapter are you on here? I think it's 7. Yeah, chapter 7. Let me share my screen here in a second. There we go. Let's make this into play from the start. Cool. Hold on, let me find something really quick. All right, chapter 7. Here we go. Talking about ethical issues in the global business environment, just basically looking about what's going on in the global business environment and how this impacts and correlates in the cross section between global business ethics and getting to bribery and all that kind of stuff too. It's actually kind of interesting stuff, this chapter. So ethical issues in the global business environment, questionable marketing and plant safety practices. We'll kind of jump right into that. There was in some emerging markets, third world countries, they had this big kind of marketing, as a Brit to say, controversy, where they had infant formula. They basically kind of tried to encourage everybody from a marketing perspective that women's breast milk was not as healthy and wasn't good for the child. So what they've tried to do is that they were tried from a marketing perspective, just encourage people to buy baby formula, and then you got everybody hooked on the baby formula instead of breast milk. And then from there, they started cutting corners for cost and making the formula actually wasn't as healthy as it could have been. So large companies were encouraging bottle feeding for a profit motive. And then there's been some pretty tragic plant safety practices around the world. Once again, just to kind of cut corners, like plant safety, the Union Carbide in India, there's a factory leak that led to a fire that killed between 15 and 20,000 people. And actually could have been, it said between 15 and 20,000 because there was a lot of contamination involved in that. So they're not really sure on the number of deaths, but I think it's between 15 and $20,000 once again, because they want to, just to kind of cut corners and do it from a profit motive. There was also a factory fire in India where 112 workers ended up dying. And then also in Bangladesh, there was a factory collapse, kind of like in a sweatshop of people making garments, where 1,100 workers were injured, or were killed actually, and more than 3,000 were injured. And because they don't have kind of fair labor practices in place, we would never do it here in the U.S. because of our laws, thankfully, because of our laws and our regulations. But some companies, U.S. companies, would outsource labor to other parts of the world. But we just had to make sure that if you're representing a United States company, that you are acting in an ethical way, and also making sure that other people practicing business around the world, even if they're not U.S. companies, there's a certain standard that we're all going to live up to. So there's a Fair Labor Association. What is that? This is an organization that's been working for more than 20 years to improve sweatshop conditions and human rights violations, have an equal playing field, and just essentially standards for workers, hopefully around the world. It's not every country in the world is buying into it, but it is growing. Companies that include Adidas, Cutter and Buck, Patagonia, Under Armour, Barnes and Noble, Puma, and many other affiliate universities are a part of the Fair Labor Association, once again, to protect workers. They use a multi-stakeholder approach to improve workers' lives, because now we look at, before used to be the shareholders used to be the main stakeholders. Now there are many stakeholders around that are connected and affiliated with corporations. And they employ basically a 3-step process of setting standards through, 1, a code of conduct. There's kind of expectations, and we'll get into a lot more of that a little bit later. 2, monitor and reporting what was happening. And 3, supporting compliance, which is a big one. There's something called the SA 8000, or the Social Accountability 8000. That was just another one of these kind of initiatives, and with the intent to improve sweatshop and human rights conditions. And the current standards they have for that are child labor, cannot use child labor. Forced or compulsory labor, can't force people into working. Make sure they have health and safety, some increased health and safety conditions. Freedom of association, that you can associate with whoever you want in the workplace, or don't want in the workplace, or even surrounding the workplace. Discrimination, make sure there's no discrimination. Make sure there's there's discipline for the corporations, and also people are not unfairly disciplined because of how they act or do not act in the workplace. Make sure there's working hours. You can't just work these people, to these insane, crazy hours. Having some type of standards. I always pronounce this, remuneration, which is basically that is what all that is making sure there's some additional components and abilities to benefit from employees aside from your wages. Making sure there could be some kind of benefits, some essentially some compulsory options for you to take part in aside from your benefits. And then the management systems, make sure there's like some legit management systems in place that are taking accountability of fairness, safety, and just kind of overall improvement of people's lives. Corruption, bribery, and questionable payments. Oh, by the way, our Easter egg for today is Long Beach, California. I was born in Long Beach. Corruption. What is corruption? That's essentially just the misuse of company assets for political favors, kickbacks, and protection money for police, free junkets for government. What does that mean? You just junkets for government. That would mean if you had some government officials come over and pay a visit, and you just essentially just take care of them and you wine and dine them. Free junkets for government officials, secret price fixing agreements, and insider dealing, just to mention a few. What do all of these things have in common? They are attempts to influence the outcomes of decisions. In cases when the nature and extent of the influence are not made public. In essence, their activities, these are abuses of power. These are just ways that people are trying to abuse power to impact and influence decisions related to business. Bribery. It's a good one, right? What's bribery? The primary form of corruption found in global businesses, and its practice merits closer examination. Bribery is the practice of offering something in order to gain an illicit advantage. You give somebody something, and you hope to get an advantage out of that. Some in business believe that bribery is necessary in some parts of the world, and some countries of the world continue to assert that they are culturally obligatory and defensible. We'll get into that. I'll get into kind of something that I experienced one time in a different part of the world. Opinions for bribery, right? Bribes are necessary. Actually, I can get into it at the end of this slide here. Bribes are necessary for profit in order to do business. Everybody does it. Some people in some countries, everybody does it. It's just going to happen anyway. It's just kind of just the common operating kind of the SOPs, the standard operating procedures for business. Bribery is an accepted practice in many countries. It is normal and it is expected. And bribes are forms of commissions, taxes, or compensation for conducting business between cultures. I was in Vietnam about 10, 11 years ago. And I was there on a trip with a big group of people. And we were going from Hong Kong to Vietnam. And we asked them, where's a good place to eat there? He told us, I won't tell you the name of the place, but it had really good Mexican food there. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. We need to get some great Mexican food. Because went to China and then we went to Hong Kong, and it was a group of some like associates of mine. And we grew up like 20 people. And they told us this Mexican restaurant, and we're all just kind of just craving, just jonesing for some Mexican food. We get there, we hear the guy talk. We hear a guy who sounds just like us. His guy's from Southern California. You can just tell by the way he talks. And we started talking to him, and he says he was working for a tech company up in Northern California. There was a recession hit. He lost his job. He cashed out his 401k. He was going to travel around the world. He started teaching English. Loved Vietnam, but he says, they don't have here. They don't have really good Mexican food. So he says, he found a building, and from the time, here's the good part. From the time it took him, the time he found a location to the time he opened, 6 weeks passed. That does not happen here in the US. You have to go through permitting. and gotta go to the cities and all that kind of stuff. It takes months and months and months to get something open. I think said he spent like about $25,000 to get everything done. He says he made that money back easy in his first month. Then I asked him about, like, how do you handle taxes here? He says, well, tax guy comes by about once a month, and he'll ask me how much you do in business, and he said, let's say I do. He just threw out a number. Let's say I do $20,000. I'll tell him I did 10, and then they say, okay, here's how much you owe, and he'd give him some money cash, and then he would say, and here's a little bit for you and your family, and that was it. And he says, all right, I'll see you next time around. But what he did tell me, he says the American dream is very alive, but for me, it's in Vietnam, and he's got this thriving business in there. But that was just the way that they operate around there. He said he has to keep extra cash on him and ride his scooter in case he gets pulled over by a cop, and it's just common there, and that's just how it is. It's just a way of life. The problem with that, with the tax situation, is that let's say you start giving somebody an extra 10%, and then they ask a few months later or a year later, no, I need 15 now, and then it goes up to 20. It's kind of like the old mob mentality of these people who would come around. You see, like these old like gangster mafia type guys. They come around and they would throw a brick through the window, your front window, and then they would come around and say, hey, we're offering you protection. We're going to offer you protection so nobody will do that again, even though they did it. And for protection, we're going to charge you $500 a month. You pay them the 500, and then, you know what? A couple years later, they say, we need $800 a month, and you don't pay. Then they end up, maybe throw another brick through your window or something, and something might happen to you. That's kind of where this kind of leads to, the bribery and just kind of unscrupulous business activities. So opinions against bribery. So that was all the reasons for bribery. People say it's just kind of just standard operating procedures in some companies. Here's all the reasons against it. Bribes are inherently wrong and cannot be accepted under any circumstances. Bribes are illegal in the United States and most developed nations, and therefore unfair elsewhere. One should not compromise one's own beliefs. Managers should not deal with corrupt governments. Such demands, once started, never stop. That's exactly kind of the example I gave you. One should take a stand for honesty, morality, and ethics. And those receiving bribes are the only ones who benefit, which is legit. It's true. And bribes create dependence on corrupt individuals and countries, and bribes deceive stockholders and pass on cost to customers. Grease payments. This is a fun one. I don't know if it could be fun. Also known as facilitating payments. These are the type of payments are commonplace in many countries. Just like bribes, once they start, they might be expected. So what are grease payments? The closest thing you can think about, like, a grease payment would be a kind of a correlation, somewhat connected. Let's say you make a reservation for a restaurant, and you go to the restaurant, and you've already made reservations. You've already made this kind of just this contract with them that you have a table reserved, but you go up to the maitre d' or the server, you give him a $20 bill, say, hey, can I get an extra good table? It's a special night for me and my special someone. And can I get that table with the view? And then boom, that's how you say, in the world of like the old mobsters, you say you got to grease a couple people, kind of grease up their palms, essentially, just slip a little bit of money in their hand to help facilitate an already existing arrangement that you have. My brother, funny story, he used to go to a restaurant to try to impress girls, and he knew the guy who owned the restaurant, so he would try to be a big shot in front of everybody, in front of her, and say, hey, here's 20K, how about we get a really special table? And it's like, all right, great. And then they get a good table, and then after they got situated, he'd go excuse himself to use the restroom or wash his hands, and he'd meet the guy back by the bathroom, and he'd give him his money back. So essentially, grease payments are, you want to help facilitate something that an agreement that you already have. So let's say you have an agreement to get something made or a factory made, and it's already going along, and it's going a little bit slower than it should be. You got to grease. And in third world country, you might want to grease them a little bit. give them a little bit more money just to kind of make sure that they pick up the pace, essentially. That absolute overt bribery would probably happen in the beginning of it. Like, here's how much to make sure that we can get permitted and get this done. It's going to cost us $1 million. I'm going to give this other organization or a person or a government official an extra $200,000 to make sure it's done. That's like that's bribery, or even more. But then as things start slowing down, you're running out of time. That's when you start kind of there, and people are supposed to be doing the job. That's when you grease them a little bit. So, Transparency International. So another group, special interest group, which is modeled after human rights groups and Amnesty International. And what they want to do is just be the world's foremost anti-corruption organization. They said, our mission is to stop corruption and promote transparency, accountability, and integrity at all levels and across all sectors of society. Really just kind of to, because when you think about it, it's like, all these kind of bribery, grease payments, and all that stuff. How can just, if you are a person with limited means, you have a great idea, you put all of your money into something, and and you really want to do something purposeful, impactful for yourself, for your community, and make kind of a big impact on the world. How can you get ahead if there's all these bribery options and grease options and you don't have that extra money? So companies like this, like Transparency International, try to really kind of combat that. The corruption is interesting. The Corruption Perception Index, so the CPI, not to be confused with the Consumer Price Index. CPI ranks 180 countries and territories by their perceived levels of public sector corruption, according to experts and business people. The least corrupt countries are Denmark, New Zealand, Finland, Singapore, Sweden, and Switzerland. Those are the least corrupt. They do everything, kind of on the up and up by the book, whatever that book is. The most corrupt: Venezuela, Yemen, Syria, Somalia, South Sudan. You cannot get anything done in most of those countries without corruption, without bribery, without grease payments, without kind of trying to influence the right or wrong people in any type of government setting. The United States is 25th, which is like not in the top 5. Because still in the United States, it's about who you know. It's still about who you know and how you get things done. With the Denmark, New Zealand, Finland, Singapore, Sweden, Switzerland, it's pretty much an even playing field for everyone. Strategies for improving global business ethics. One big one: make sure you have consistent global codes of conduct. Here's how you're expected to act. 2, linking ethics with a global strategy. Making sure that ethics are consistently aligned with the global strategy. 3, suspension of business activities in certain countries. We'll get into that a little bit here. 4, ethical impact statements and audits, so that there can be statements of how ethically companies are operating, and then how are they open to being audited, or have a third party come in and look at them. Levi Strauss, Levi's company. Levi's. They took an unprecedented action of publishing on its website a list of all activities, active, owned, and operated, and contract factories producing the company's branded products, which is big, because sometimes a lot of these companies want to be very kind of secretive about where that they're doing any manufacturing, because they don't want any eyeballs on them. But Levi says, here's everything we're doing. Here's everywhere we're working. Starbucks. They have this anti-retaliation policy, which basically states the company does not tolerate retaliation or victimization of any partner who raises concerns or questions regarding a potential violation. So essentially, you are open, you're free to report a violation. That anybody who reports a violation of the standards of business conduct or any Starbucks policy that they reasonably believe to have occurred. So you don't have to be like essentially in fear worldwide of you working at Starbucks and something unfair happens to you. They're going to make sure that you have the proper protection, and there's a process in place. Suspension of activities. Here's some companies that basically said, you know what, I don't like how where business is being done in some of these places. So, and they said, nope, enough. IBM and Coca-Cola, they established a precedent by suspending their activities in India because that country's position on the extent of national ownership and control, making sure that there's sometimes their government was a little too involved with their business, and they said, nope, not for us, not today. Procter & Gamble, P&G, they closed a Pampers plant in Nigeria rather than pay bribes to custom inspectors, which means every time that to get the product out of Nigeria through their custom inspectors, they were expecting to get paid a ton of money just to approve product leaving the country. And so they says, no, we're done with this. And they pulled out of Nigeria. And Google, they moved their search out of China in 2010 because of censored government searches. Google has a weird relationship with China. I mean, there's some that will tell, I mean, they're back in China, but under limited searches. So, they kind of played tough and hardball back in 2010. Because when you're in China, it's like, you cannot search anything under like Tiananmen Square, that revolt, and essentially that day, the anniversary day, it's a very strange day with their news coverage, because they'll make sure that nobody sheds light on it. Even when you talk to some people around there, it's like some tour guides, they were very, very kind of just cryptic about that. 5 vital steps to minimize corruption for companies. 1, high-level commitment to top management. Make that commitment to top management that they can move forward with having some kind of anti-bribery and operate ethically. 2, detailed statements of policies and operating procedures. So they feel comfortable sharing that. 3, training and discussions of policies and procedures, making sure that it's, once again, very open. We want to make sure everything's open and transparent. 4, hotlines. It's like hotlines and helplines for organizational members. It's once again that transparency and that open communication about the procedures that are in place. And 5, investigative follow-up reporting and disclosures. That's it. That's all I got. I'll see you around for chapter 8.